Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reflections on what has been a series of multiple Google events stretching across Google I/O, Brandcast, GML. My name is Simon Poulton, and today I am joined by two fellow Tinuitians, but also ex-Googlers, or Zooglers, I believe, as the LinkedIn nomenclature requires, to talk about what just happened. One of the things I think was really interesting, even during the event, when we were up in San Jose, I turned on the news, the local news, and it said, Google has launched a new search engine. And I was looking at it, I was like, no, they didn't. That didn't happen. Did they go to the same event that I did? And then just this morning, I saw an article from Axios and said, this is the end of the internet's golden age. I saw another article from Mashable and said, Google search is changing forever. And I honestly look at both those headlines and go, those are just incredibly hyperbolic. I don't recall that specifically happening, just in terms of the changes we saw. There were ads in AI mode, which is interesting because ads in AI mode apparently have been launched in the past, but they are still the white whale of search ads. You never know if they're out there. I found one time and the entire company celebrated. It was a very interesting moment. There were AI briefs that were announced. There were business agents for leads. There were direct offers that we knew coming through commerce. There were messaging ads. There were AI and Max for search campaigns and then search campaigns for travel. Journey aware bidding, new budgeting and opportunity tools. I believe there was some smart bidding expansion, new customer acquisition modes. I think one of the big things they were saying is, look, everything, whatever you press doesn't really make a difference. Just give us the data. So I'd love to just hear your take on, from a search perspective, one, do you think it was as profound as that shift? And why do you think they're talking about this whole new era of Google? Is it just that intelligent search box? And then two, what are you really honed in on as we're thinking about the best utility from GML for search practitioners?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a lot of hyperbolic headlines. I agree with you there. I think a lot of what's happening here is just an accelerated speed of evolution. So search has been on this really fast evolving. There's been so many developments. There's been so many different ways that people are using search. And I think we're just seeing that speeding up even more. This intelligent search box is intriguing. I don't know that it's necessarily completely brand new as everyone is talking about in these headlines. It's basically the search box. People are already searching in longer queries. They're already using more than the 2 or 3 words that they used to search with. So it's not necessarily new. We're now realizing this is how things are now. So this is how we need to understand that search is intelligent. It's no longer just people looking for Nike down.
And the concept there was really two things, right? It was one, I didn't think this was a big deal, but I know I looked at you and you were kind of like, oh, that's really neat. The search box will expand as you type more. I was like, doesn't it? I think, Brian, you said it already does. Yeah. Is that a big deal?
Essentially, it's a design choice that's changing. Yeah. And when the actual search box itself looks like it's getting wider and longer and deeper, I think the human reaction is to be like, oh, wow, this is this dictionary moment, as Google likes to call it. And it is. But again, it's not necessarily completely different than what we've already been experiencing, really, since AI overviews and AI mode launched. Yeah. People are using it more, I think, now. And especially, I think we're also seeing this acceleration of multimodal searching happening with, I personally love to use like Gemini Live. It's such a cool way. You can literally look at the world around you and say, hey, Gemini, what is this weed growing in my front lawn and how do I get rid of it? And it can give you an on-demand of the world around you right then and there. And I think that is what's exciting to me. I think human curiosity is just really being triggered in the best ways right now because of how people are able to interact with search in these new ways.
One of the things, I guess it's always been a question, there was one thought in the SEO world of, hey, is AI mode going to become search? Right? Is it going to replace the SERP? And some of the headlines I was seeing was saying it essentially will. So while the input has changed, has the user experience changed there? Or is it, I don't know, more of the same of what we've seen before?
Yeah, I think it's in pockets. There are definitely changes happening, but people still go to Google for a lot of the same reasons they used to, in terms of, hey, I just take me to this website or help me understand this one answer I'm looking for. That is still happening. That hasn't gone away completely, but we are seeing this shift of people asking more like discovery-based questions. And it's more like an ask than a search. It's like, I'm asking because I want to learn more and understand this concept versus just take me to XYZ. So yes, AI mode is definitely changing the way that people are interacting with Google search, but it hasn't completely uprooted it from what I'm seeing.
I feel like it's also getting just like more and more people are getting more comfortable with having conversation with Google versus just like that whole like the very specific question, just take me to whatever.com. But like I was like, even my anecdote, I just go to Google and like I'm just starting to just almost like brain dump question, just I would to my wife or any of my friends, and like I'm just having that ongoing conversation. So I don't know, maybe I'm adopting a little bit too much there, but it's also interesting just to see like how much that the search results are actually changing based off just how I'm engaging. And I feel like people are starting to slowly get used to like using these LLMs and like the AI to help get to the answer to their specific question versus just, oh, I got to do 5 different queries. And I feel like there's that adoption.
Yeah, one thing I thought was very interesting, and I've seen this in AI Studio, I haven't seen it live on the Google results page, but they talked about this at GML, and that is the predictive expansion of your prompt or your query, and that is you'll type maybe 5 or 6 words, and it will then say, would you like to add this to it? Kind of like how autocomplete does, but autocomplete, of course, is based on other common searches and maybe a little bit of your history. This was a lot more expansive than that and had a lot more coverage and really even maybe changed the intent of the question. And I put all this out there because I think the big question, Michelle, is the keyword dead? Has Google finally killed the keyword? It's a question every year coming out of GML. People want to know.
The keyword is dying very
It's on
quickly.
life support?
It is on life support. Yeah, it is still, from the paid side of things, we know that keywords are still required for a paid search campaign currently. I don't think that will be the case this time next year. I think AI Max will have completely gotten rid of keywords and the necessity for keywords. We've seen a lot of evolutions, even within AI Max. They've got this new AI brief technology that essentially, in my view, looks like it could replace negative keywords. You basically just tell it, hey, we only want to be coming up for these types of search intent. We only want our creative to say these types of things. You give it both positive and negative guidance and guardrail, aka negative keywords, positive keywords. Those are ideas that are going to be just replaced by this kind of natural language guardrails that are now going to be inputs, like agentic inputs into the advertising system. I actually talked to one of the product leads at Google, one of the leads for AI Max, and asked her, like, are negative keywords going away? And she told me, wink, nudge, nudge, let's test it. Let's see, do we even need negative keywords if we have strong enough guardrails with AI brief? So like I said, they're not dead yet, but they're very quickly fading.
For what it's worth, I've long been bullish on trying to diminish negative keywords in the sense that we just have so much bias in the way that we think about the vernacular that the vocabulary choice that we have and how we as individuals search and go, oh, that's definitely not it. Some people actually would say that. I know it sounds strange to you. I am concerned, but does that concern you at all though? Because when I read that, when I see that, I go, gosh, there's no way I can ever tell them everything about the brand, right? Like the guidance there is going to be great. Maybe for 99.999% of ads, it will work very well until you do that 0.001% ad where it does go maybe a little off the rails. And I don't think we are past the hallucinatory era of the AI overviews. I think you still see them out there. If you you make up an idiom, type it into Google right now. Google thinks it's a real thing. Lily Ray had a really interesting post over the weekend where she showed that AI overviews have replaced results in Google. And she typed disregard. And the LLM responded, oh, okay, I'll disregard that. And I was like, no, she was looking for the word disregard. She wants that defined. This is a strange moment in time of would you say we're fully handing the keys to Google at this moment in time?
We're playing Whac-A-Mole with Google, where we need to say, these are our guardrails, this is my brand identity, this is what makes sense for me. But Google is going to do its best, and most of the time, like you said, it's going to work majority of the time, but you can't fully get ahead of it. It's the same type of challenge we've had in the past. If you think back to like a search partner network, like you can opt out of certain websites, but you can't only tell it, I only want to opt into these.
Right.
An opt-out kind of culture, and that's the same thing that we're still faced with this expansionary search moment we're having. We can't fully opt out of every single potential negative press that may come up related to a certain category. So that's why I say it's Whac-A-Mole. You have to monitor, and that's where the human intelligence still comes in. The brand identity, it's so important for there to be human eyes on this and not fully let the controls go to Google, while still knowing that we have to give up some of that trust in order to gain the scale that we're looking for, because it can work really well.
That is a very interesting term, to give up some trust to find the scale, because I think there's about to be a reckoning between CMOs and their legal counterparts, how comfortable or how much risk they're willing to afford in the pursuit of growth. And so that's going to have to be, at least for brands right now that are sitting there saying, we need to approve every single ad before it goes live. I think it's still going to work for a while. I just don't know if it will see scale. And then there's a point at which you go, you'll be a second-class advertiser, essentially. You won't have the access or the ability, especially when they showed those ads in AI mode. And by the way, I thought it was really interesting, just for everyone's reference, the AI mode ads up until this point in time have been just a lift, and we picked up the search ad, then we just dropped it into AI mode. mode and said, there's your AI mode ad. And I've always had this critique of, you're not doing very much with that canvas, right? That doesn't seem like a very native ad experience. It just seems like you've dropped it in, kind of, I don't know, display ads on Meta back in the day. This moment, though, they showed us these highly conversational ads that are curated in real time that were a lot more native. Didn't seem as disruptive within that moment. Those ads are the ones that they just won't even have access to, as far as I understand, if they aren't going down the ad brief path. But anyway, there were so many search updates. YouTube, though, was spilling over the edges into GML. This is not a new thing. In fact, last year, I somewhat facetiously predicted we would see AI Max for YouTube. We did not see AI Max for YouTube, but we did see some really interesting YouTube coverage. And Brian, I'd love to shift to you. We can talk Brandcast, but look, the number one thing of Brandcast is usually just, we've got some great partners out there. And then occasionally there's just mad formats. I think we saw the real interesting stuff with YouTube happening at GML. Are you able to give a quick recap of the things that you found most interesting from a YouTube point of view?
Yeah, I'll combine YouTube from Brandcast and GML because I think that there was overlap between the two, but there's slight differences. So Brandcast, there were two things that I thought were very interesting and there's a lot of different things, but one is the creator focus. We've been talking long about the creators and they always have a bunch of the creators come onto stage and just talk about the latest and greatest things that they're doing. But this year they really leaned more heavily into creators and how they're developing content series. Erling Haaland has his own series. Dude Perfect guys have their own series. Trevor Noah has an exclusive series. I think that they are launching about 20 different new series that are coming to YouTube that are exclusive to just...
That's what they told us about. There's so many, I'm sure, that are under wraps right now. And I think Alex Cooper was doing a big...
Alex Cooper has a short form series, I think, that they were teasing out. So
I forget the guy's name, but the guy on the subway is now doing it in taxis with random taxi drivers, and then they drive them off to fishing holes.
Just does interviews.
Yeah, but it's a very interesting sort of, I don't know, maybe is YouTube entering their sequel era with these creative partnerships almost?
It's interesting to me because there's long been this whole YouTube's the number one streaming platform, but the content obviously is different than what you get from your traditional TV. There's a lot less of that scripted content,
right?
But it almost seems like they're trying to wade the waters into there. So that's really interesting to me. So I think there's going to be a lot more on the creator front that we're going to see coming up in the future. The other thing that they announced at Brandcast, which I thought was very interesting, which kind of spills into GML, is the ability to buy directly from the TV screen with Google Pay.
Yeah.
That has long been the challenge that I've always had with the TV screen because, you could scan the QR code, all well and good.
Maybe some advertisers do that because we're like, oh, this is neat and novel. But I asked my wife, she's, I'm not doing that. I'm like, I know, it's very disruptive. But now, Google Pay.
Yeah, as they've been improving the experience from a shopping standpoint on the TV screen, where you could have your shopping feed with the images now show up. They announced that, I believe, last year at Brandcast or GML. That also, what am I going to do with this? And then I send it to my phone. I can never find it because it's on the YouTube app. It doesn't come over as an SMS or a text message. But now just being able to buy on the TV screen. Will it get wide adoption in the near term? Maybe not, but it's also just a gateway, I think, into the shopping capability. So a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about commerce in just a moment, but this does also lend itself into that larger conversation around the universal cart. And I'd very much like to hear from both of you on how you're thinking about that as Google's Universal Commerce Protocol, or UCP. Amazon's partnered with them there, which is very interesting, and what that looks like in terms of cross-Google ecosystem commerce, really. So it's no longer just limited to you're in a web browser or you're in your cell phone. It's literally anywhere you're interacting with Google, you can now be interacting with commerce, which I think is particularly interesting. But anyway, back to YouTube.
And then I think that kind of blends into what GML was really focused on. So Brandcast, you had more of that branding and the creator side. There's a little bit of touch on the e-commerce and performance. Demand gen obviously was featured, but then demand gen and YouTube really came out from a performance lens in GML, leaning into being able to have demand gen be the performance driver, which I think we all know and love, and that's what we lean into. The one thing that I thought was very interesting was just the level of data that they were showing from a performance standpoint, specifically from the social. And they had a lot of really interesting data points where they're saying demand gen is just so much better than social and TV. And they were calling out a lot of the other channels. They were really playing hard for that.
Shots were fired for sure. It was the most aggressive take I think I've seen from Google, directly going after both TikTok and Meta Reels with head-to-head studies. I think they said 82% more likely to transact via YouTube Shorts. Now, of course, I haven't validated that on my own, but if Google's going to make that claim, of course they have data to back that up.
That just got me thinking as well. And just to relate to what we even talked about Tinuiti Live a few weeks ago with our deterministic measurement, that to me is also the thing, Google's really pushing on brand formants is what they're calling it. So having brand campaigns with performance lens, but it also opens up the ability for us to even leverage our deterministic measurement from YouTube TV and YouTube on TV and the creator ecosystem, and to really bring this whole brand formants to the holistic view of YouTube, where Google's really trying to focus more on the demand gen piece. And I had some great conversation with the demand gen product folks about this, and the YouTube on TV masthead product lead. It's there's a lot of opportunity here. We just got to lean into it and be able to showcase the performance overall. But all that to be said, I'm really excited going back to the search component.
Yeah.
Ask YouTube seems really interesting as well. Just how the evolution of search on YouTube is going to be pushed forward as well. I'm keen on this.
Just like YouTube is always sat in this oddly ambiguous place, and sometimes Google will say, did you know YouTube's the second largest search engine in the world? And you're like, wait, what? It's a search engine? That's how you define it? I think they're going to come out with some stat next year and say, did you know that YouTube is the fourth most used LLM in the world? And you're like, what? That's absurd. Is it an LLM? Apparently it is. So but look, I'm already using a lot of these features. In fact, I think some of the way that I was seeing the new AI mode, I saw shorts in AI mode. They've really better curated that experience. I think I had to change the battery in my car's key fob over the weekend, and that was bringing all the YouTube shorts up. I'm like, thank God, a format where I don't have to listen to this person's life story for the first 3 minutes. We're over that. We're now onto the actual, this is the core utility. Google gives me in 4 steps with an AI mode. And then, hey, they've got some intent that I drive a Subaru Crosstrek and maybe I'm in need of an upgrade. Who knows? But speaking of being in need of an upgrade and just the wider world of commerce, I mentioned UCP. I think the advances we've seen there, the partnership with Amazon, very interesting. But they talked a lot about feeds. And so, Michelle, I'd love to hear from you on your perspective on how important is feed management in the modern era. And was there anything in particular that stuck out to you around maybe the merchant center conversation around share of voice that you think is going to be particularly relevant for advertisers in the year ahead?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing here is this shift where your product feed is becoming even more important than your website in a lot of ways. There's so much interconnectivity across retailer sites and your own homepage, and then what Google can see through UCP. So if you are not making sure your feed is as up to date and helpful as possible, then your competitors are really clearly going to just take that space. I think this is a really critical moment for retailers to understand that feed optimization is no longer optional. It's absolutely critical. It is the foundation of success in this future agentic shopping world that we're very quickly moving into.
And I don't even know if it's feed optimization exclusively. I would even, and maybe optimization includes the concept, but it's augmentation. It is so much, there's so much they're looking for you to add there. When they were talking about, product value adjustments and having different bids on different products and the intelligence that's needed there to maybe better understand the products that lead to a higher lifetime value overall, and like how you showcasing that, even maybe how you even referencing the downsides to diminish return rates. I think there's a lot of things here for advertisers to be experimenting with as they move forward. And as we talk about that, of course, I think this leads very naturally into this larger conversation of measurement. And they did something that I think was pretty interesting. I don't know if there's much utility to it, frankly, but it was interesting in that they launched Meridian inside of Google Analytics 360. I know, Brian, how are you feeling about that? Is there utility here? Is anyone going to use this? Because in my mind, I go, look, if you've got enough money to pay for GA360, you've also got enough money to pay for a data scientist. So you probably not the target market. And yet they've released it.
Yeah, I think we share similar views on this. I think it's beneficial, and I'd say it's a nice to have, but I would say that probably if you're going to be leaning into and you're going to be looking at some sort of more robust measurement, you're probably going to either be working with an agency, be working with a different partner, and also have some internal resources that are going to give you a more rounded sense. But will it get adoption? I'd say, will it be the thing that people really lean into? Probably not, but I think it's maybe going to be just a nice view to have.
Maybe. I'm still skeptical on the completeness of the data, and the 90% of is data preparation and cleaning, and that is not necessarily that well. Google Analytics is not a great medium for that type of approach. But there was also something, and I think maybe especially on upper funnel campaigns, was this idea of qualified future conversions. So if either of you wants to jump on that one, I'd love to get your take on, is this a value? Maybe a brief synopsis of what it even is.
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit about this as well, and I'm keen on this for even YouTube campaigns specifically, because where YouTube sits in the user journey, having a good sense of what the qualified leads could actually be coming down the pipe, I think would be beneficial, because it gives you a little bit broader view in terms of what you could expect from your media spends that you actually have. But I have a lot of questions about how they're actually going to be rolling this out. What's the methodology behind it? They teased it. It sounded really interesting and good, but I'm really more curious to see how are they bringing this to market? What am I really signing up for when I look at this type of data? And how is it really informing what the future qualified leads are going to be?
I agree. And the other part to that, my first thought in my mind was, can you bid to this? Is this worth bidding to?
Right. Yeah.
Is this going to be a forecast metric, or is this going to be a conversion type that you can actually optimize your campaigns toward qualified future conversions. Because if that's the case, that would be huge. And I think that will be, especially for these lead gen advertisers that have really long conversion cycles, the ones that don't quite know a 30-day conversion window is just not going to cut it. I'm going to miss out on so much opportunity. This can really open up the door for them if it's created properly, if these are actually valid forecasted conversions.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of challenges associated with the accuracy of this moment. But I think there's also been a larger conversation for brands, and that is the degree to which they want to use this as a just for bidding. But is this a primary KPI that you want to be reporting on internally? Is this something that you want to be sharing with your leadership internally, especially when I think about the volatility of maybe certain sales periods in the year where you're saying like, hey, look, we're really priming the pump with a lot of this, and we're really thinking we're gonna get a lot back. And again, the volatility around the Black Friday Cyber Monday period is always unique. And while it's predictable that it will happen as a period, it's not predictable how flat or spiky that period will be for folks out there. There was one other piece around Data Manager, and I know we've talked about this in the past, but I think Google was talking a lot about this. It does seem like Data Manager is going to be one of their primary just targets in terms of how they're thinking about this holistic data management moving forward. Michelle, are you seeing anything there in terms of brands what do they need to be doing to get ready for this if they're not using it already? Because I think out there when we chat with brands, not a lot of them are. Is this true, or are you seeing it getting picked up more in advance? Because it's not a new solution, but the weight or emphasis that Google's putting on it does lead me to this position of, oh yeah, okay, so they're just looking at Gemini powered everything, and therefore the two most important things are really going to be your feeds and your data manager and your signal.
Yeah, I think we are seeing momentum there. A lot of it is coming down to getting the right audiences plugged into your Google campaigns to make sure that you're giving those signals to Google to bid toward the right people or steer away from the people you don't want to go after. So we are seeing more advertisers leaning into Data Manager. I think there's still a lot of ground to cover, but it's in a better place than it was this time last year in terms of adoption.
Yeah. So there are two things that I want to close this out on. One is creative, talking about Asset Studio integration. The other one is this Ask Advisor and perhaps the lack of discussion on the MCP. So let's start with Asset Studio. Is Asset Studio new? No, it's been around for a while, right? At least the features that they bring to the table now are new. Is this something is there any value to advertisers? Should they be using this? Why or why not?
I'm a fan of it. So it's been around for a while. They've been slowly adding to it. I think the challenge has always been with creative, particularly with YouTube, but this obviously spans everything within the Google ecosystem, is you also typically have a creative team, whether that's at the agency, whether that's at another agency, whether that's at the client. So a lot of times creative is like an afterthought. So we just get things, then we just run them. The thing that I like about the Asset Studio and just how they keep rolling out these different AI capabilities within it is now this could give us a little bit more flexibility and being able to maybe tweak some of the creative for YouTube specifically, or maybe just help get a seat at the table for creative. We could be a little bit more proactive, maybe even just mocking up something that we're thinking about just based off the data that we're seeing. And maybe that facilitates a conversation with the broader creative team. So I think it really does help enable marketers to have maybe more of a conversation with the creative teams, because it gives them the assets directly in Google Ads. So you don't have to go to a Canva or go into Gemini or these different tools and start to mock stuff up. Having it in the UI, I think it's quite nice because you just go there and then you could easily, if you like something, in your campaign.
Did you get the sense though, because I know you say creative teams, but did you get the sense that when Google was talking about it, there was this idea that this is for the hyphenated marketer to use, meaning they don't necessarily see a distinction between the person who's managing Google Ads campaigns and the person maybe who's handling creative. Maybe there's a creative team that handles the initial briefing and concept of how we think about the creative standards for a brand or vision for a brand, but not the day-to-day iteration. This has been a problem, I think, for a long time, in that this idea of the search manager maybe, or the person managing YouTube, they're not the person who has the aesthetic eye for this. But Google's really pushing on this idea of the hyphenated marketer, whether it be the marketer developer or the marketer creative. Do you think that's a viable path here, or is this just going to be boxed into the world of SMB? And while it is really useful for brands that don't have multiple teams working on these things, it just will never pass into that enterprise layer because it's a one-man band, essentially.
I may be a little bit more hopeful on this, so that it will actually go into the enterprise by giving the teams to actually play around a little bit more and maybe actually have something that they could then take to their creative teams if it's a siloed type of organization, which it typically is. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that Google is going to have is just the adoption, because I know that they've been talking about this here and there throughout the years. They've never really focused on it. So They talked about it over the last couple of weeks, but is it just going to die off and then it'll be another thing that they talk about like GML and Brandcast and things next year? If that's the case, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult and just going to be the SMBs where people have to get like super scrappy every piece of the Google Ads platform to really make sure that they're running their campaigns effectively. So I'm hoping that it becomes that bridge that the marketer could be able to speak more intelligently to the creative team without even having to have that creative eye or that creative background.
Well, look,
aspirational.
I like that as a more optimistic take on this moment.
Got to be glass half full.
Or maybe even glass quarter full at this moment, because I'm looking at this going, I hear the utility, I see it. I think this is maybe a bit of a human orchestration problem when we think about how humans are interacting with here. And if you didn't catch my session at Tinuiti Live, it's now up on YouTube, and we can send that link out in the notes as well. But the reason I bring this up is because the Ask Advisor, and they call it an Ask Advisor pretty specifically, I don't think it is an Ask Advisor. I think it is an agent actor. And this is what gets interesting to me, is when the agents will take control. And so Michelle, I'd love to pass this one to you. And that is, as you saw the Ask Advisor presented by Google, did you see any functional difference really between what they have today with these auto-applied recommendations that they're trying out onto accounts and what the Ask Advisor is going to provide? And I guess most critically, should we trust it?
Should we trust it? It depends on the quality of your data, I would say. And that's always going to be the first caveat with any of these types of semi-agentic layers. So what's interesting to me about Ask Advisor is it is a kind of across the Google ecosystem. So it connects your Google Analytics to your Google Ads, to your Google Merchant Center, or whatever systems you're using for your brand. And that, I think, is where a lot of the value lies here, is it can down some of the silos between these sometimes disparate systems. Yes, these things can be connected all through Google Ads, but they're not always. And sometimes people aren't looking at them in the best ways. So I think this could be this additional layer on top of management that helps us to understand what is the holistic opportunity here. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a total game changer, if I'm being honest, but I do think that it could be, there could be some utility to being able to go from one system to another and have that continuity.
Yeah, so the fact that it can take action and action on your behalf, I think is very interesting, because it's essentially predicated on top of the idea of what you would use an MCP for. And Google Ads has the model context protocol for Google Ads, but it's read only. And I find it really interesting that they've introduced this capability into the UI, but not into the hands of advertisers directly. So if you want to build your own agent on top of Google Ads, you can do it using the API or maybe a third-party MCP, but not an officially supported one. Clearly, to me, this reads as we have an MCP, but we're going to use it, and we're going to give ourselves the first right of access to it. And this also harkens back to something I talked about at Tinuiti Live, and that is the idea of agentic difference depending on the goals of that agent or the attitude of that agent. And in this particular scenario, this agent is going to be a lot more aligned with Google outcomes. It's going to be looking for the lowest acceptable return for the advertiser. And so that's where I struggle with is this going to have core utility? And that is, I think it will actually, when we think about maybe some basic campaign changes that you'd want to make. And frankly, I would also say maybe, is this RIP to Google Ads editor? We were kind of talking about, there's a point at which you go, I don't know if we need an offline editor anymore. And truthfully, also when I ask folks, I don't know if half of them even know what I'm talking about. I think that's one of those, if you've been doing this for 10 years, you know what it is, but it would seem like it is foundationally going to minimize the amount of time that is spent making modifications. I think it could change the amount of time spent making modifications. The question is, where do you let it, or how far do you go down that path? Do you let it perform the analysis and then say, yes, I'm going to make some big changes here? Or are we bringing the analysis to it and then we'll make those changes on our behalf? Super interesting stuff. And just as we go through this journey, one of the fun things at the end of the event was I vibe coded a game while we were sitting in the keynote room, which was GML Jeopardy. Who knows? Maybe we'll be able to send that out. Maybe we'll send a video of that at some point. But it was all of the updates from the event in a Jeopardy format. And we created that game in about 10 minutes. And that's the point that we're at right now in terms of core utility for advertisers and marketers to be able to just create their own tools, potentially on top of these environments. So I'd love to invite each of you just to sum up any key thoughts you have and maybe a fast 30 each. So Brian, why don't we start with you? Your biggest takeaway and the thing you think will be most impactful over the next year?
I think you were just talking to it from an agentic standpoint. I think that the focus that we're really leaning more into this whole agentic media buying and just like, how do you actually stitch together all these different data sources to make meaningful strategies that drive business outcomes, not even just within the Google ecosystem, but more holistically, is one of the things that I think that I pretty much took away as the high level and like where the future is going. I even had a breakout session with the DV360 product team. They're really leaning more into agentic buying tools that are going to be coming to DV360 in the future. But one of the main things that we had in the roundtable was, this is all great, but I feel like this might have been like 2 years too late, because everybody's now talking about building their own tools internally that sit atop Google Ads and all these different things to bring all the data together to make informed decisions, not just within Google or within DV360. I'm very interested to see where all this heads, but just seeing like all these different releases and the new features, that's where I'm really excited, and that's where I'm going to be leaning more in.
Yes, very much the rising tension of should Google build the agents or should we? And I think the jury is out on that one, and there's a lot here in the future. But Michelle, final thoughts?
Yeah, final thoughts for me. I'm seeing this as a moment where consumers, for the first time, are able to just find so much more value and utility in the products that Google's putting out. They're really building for consumers, which is, in my mind, the right way to do it. Making their products useful, making them accessible. I know that's kind of part of Google's mission. That's a big thing that lights a fire under them every day. And I really appreciate that as someone who actually uses these tools. I think also from a marketer's perspective, having more utility from consumers just means there's more marketing opportunity. There's more sales to be made. There's more leads to be had from consumers who are using these products because they're getting better and better. So I think it's a great moment to be on both ends of it, from the consumer side and from the marketing side, as long as you're brave enough to lean in and try these new things as they're coming out.
I think that is particularly salient in the AI era, and that is crossing the risk chasm that we're all facing, not just in advertising, but in every single aspect of how we're maybe in deference to LLMs to act on our behalf or to take actions. And while some of them can be very simple and straightforward, others are rife with complexity. And I don't know, the decisions that I always overthink the most are the ones that affect my own bank account. And this is clearly something that's affecting brands' own bank accounts, and will likely have some large changes afoot in the year ahead. The reality with this moment in time is that Google makes a big performance of all these things. We will go, this is very interesting, very exciting. I think we'll see 6 months from now what actually comes to life or what actually sees adoption. But if there are things that we were talking about here today that you'd like to follow up on, please reach out to myself, Michelle, or Brian, or really anyone within the broader advertising teams here at Tinuiti, and we will be more than happy to lead that discussion. And I know we're in a number of alphas and betas with Google at this moment, testing out several of these features. The good news is, at least, I think we'll be first to market with a lot of them, and we'll find out firsthand if they succeed or fail. But thank you both, and thank you if you've stayed along this long in the recording, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next year.